A következőekben dr. Claude Scheuer, a CEREPS egyik alapító tagja és elnöke fog beszámolni a CEREPS tevékenységeiről és céljairól. Előadásának címe Minőségi testnevelés a CEREPS perspektívájából. Elnök úr, öné a szó.
In this presentation, we will not reflect kind of the position of our association, which is a very young association, as you will learn also in the next few minutes. But we look at physical education in general, and we want to address the first part of the topic of this conference, which means what does it mean, quality physical education? And for those of you that are waiting for very specific answers to this question, I have to disappoint you because we will more or less formulate questions that should be addressed then in the future. So first, I'm presenting shortly CEREPS as the European Council of Research in Physical Education and School Sports. Then I will talk about the quality of physical education as a school subject. And then I will enlarge a little bit the perspective and talk about an active school as a setting and a community network. And in the end, I will close with some conclusions, which I already mentioned will be questions. So CEREPS is the European Council of Research in Physical Education and School Sport, and was founded only 6 years, sorry, here in Luxembourg, and CEREPS is also based in Luxembourg. So we have individual and institutional members, and we represent a body of coordination of research items and projects in all physical education and school sport settings. And our aim is to become a major address for research applications and exchange of research items on the subject of physical education and school sports on an institutional and intercultural level. And this is a way that we started to go, as I mentioned before, 6 years ago. During that time, we had annual meetings or summits, first in Luxembourg, where we started with delegates from 13 countries. Then in Brussels, in Lisbon, last year in Prague, and this year virtually in Budapest and in Luxembourg, and also for the first time where we have a combined event, the CEREPS Plus Summit together with the Hungarian International Physical Education Conference. In between, we also contributed with a satellite symposium to the FIEP European Congress here in Luxembourg in 2017. During these years, we published a few things. Actually, we published a book, an anthology on research on physical education and school sport in Europe. This is in some way the product of our inaugural meeting in 2016. And this book was published this year, where we discussed general items of development of physical education and school sport in Europe, and where we present also country reports according to given criteria from 20 European countries. And we closed this book with a comparative analysis of modern pathways in Europe, what the current actual situation is when it comes to physical education embedded in school systems, and also research emerging from here. We are at the moment also working on the planned publication of our proceedings from the 2018 summit in Lisbon. And also this year we published the proceedings of last year's CEREPS summit in Prague on the topic of quality criteria and outcome standards for physical education and school sport. A short outlook into the future. We still are very young, and we still want to develop further as an organization with our members. We see ourselves only at the start here. And what we aim to do in the short term is to apply for European funds on projects that deal with topics that we agree on, that are important for the development of our council. Next year, we will have again a summit, and I'm happy to announce that this will be taking place in Bratislava in Slovakia at the end of June, beginning of July. And also here, due to the current developments, we want to address the current situation. So the topic will be quality physical education during Corona crisis, and we want to develop visions for the future. But now focusing on the topic of this conference and talking about the quality of physical education. For us, and when I say for us, I mean our Secretary General, Professor Dr. Roland Naul, and myself. We see the quality of physical education defined by a social ecological model of 3 different levels. In the core, and this is possibly what the most of us understand when we talk about quality physical education, we have the school subject of physical education. But as you will see now in the next few minutes, we want to focus only on the school subject because we think that the physical education of children and adolescents does not only take place in the setting of this school subject. So we also look on a meso level on a whole active school. But also here, the daily life of children and adolescents does not only take place in schools. We have also to look outside the school setting. And here we have a community-based network with different stakeholders that contribute to the physical education of our children and adolescents. But I will start with what is the core of this model, physical education as a school subject. When we try to discuss what quality physical education is, we have to operationalize what is happening in physical education into different categories, where different factors can have an impact. A few years ago, related to the publication of a book on quality physical education, we identified, based on a narrative literature review, several possible impact levels of quality physical education categories. There is certainly a structural level, which is defined by the school system, by the educational system, and also by schools. Then, and this is probably one of the most important aspects, this is the process. So what is happening in the classroom and in the school setting. We will hear more about this tomorrow in the presentation by Professor Erwin Gerler from the University of Potsdam. And talking about the structure and the process is one thing, but also we have to look at the product. What do we expect as an outcome of quality physical education? So I will now look at those 3 different levels. When we are talking about the structure, it's mostly not the teacher who can influence this. A teacher has to work in a specific setting under specific conditions. And here, on the structural level, several dimensions characterize what quality physical education is or can be, because there are also limiting factors. So these dimensions that are present here are based on the UPO project, the European Physical Education Observatory, which will be presented in detail in the afternoon by Professor Marcos Onofre from the University of Lisbon. These dimensions are the school context, then curriculum flexibility, which means what does the formal PE curriculum in a country expect teachers to implement in the frame of physical education. Then, of course, we have teacher education on several levels, initial, induction, and in service. And the education of the teachers, of course, also is a factor that has a strong influence on what is implemented later on in the PE classroom or in the PE gym. Then teacher workforce, this means which teachers with what profile do schools have to implement physical education. Then, of course, facilities, equipment, and resources are very important. It's a difference when you have a big, large sports hall where several PE classes can have quality PE at the same time, or instead you have a very small, not even a gym, but a larger classroom. So this is a big difference. And also when it comes to equipment, this is the same. Finally, we also have community partnerships. Do schools cooperate with external stakeholders like clubs, like communities, municipalities, or maybe universities? So all these are dimensions that's on the structural level that have an impact on quality physical education. Looking at the process, I present here a spiral development of competencies in physical education as it was developed by my colleague, Professor Naur. And here we always look at three different levels of competence initiated by motor processes, so motor competence, psychosocial developments, and cognitive foundation. And here you have an overview of these three areas of competence and the different processes that are initiated here. This is very important because this is what is happening, what is implemented in the physical education classes. And of course, here we can have different levels of quality. Then looking at the product, before we can discuss the process, we have to know what shall be the product at the end of this process. And therefore we need different benchmarks for achievement of the quality or the standards based on the structure and the process of physical education. Here again, these standards will vary between countries, between the context of a school, between types of schools. And we have to agree on what the final product shall be. And I just want to mention a few possible outcomes that are not defined very clearly, but could give us an idea. I think that what we want to have at the end is something like a physically well-educated person that will be able to take part in the culture of movement, in the culture of physical activities, in the culture of sports, based on a self-reflected way. Another terminology very popular nowadays is a physically literate person, in analogy to literacy or the term of numeracy. We could also talk about physical literacy and a physically literate person. But there might be other possible formulations of the final product that we want to have. And of course, if we want to have, for example, physically literate persons, we have to define what we understand here. This was now the look at the school subject physical education. And now, as already mentioned before, I want to broaden a little bit the perspective and talk about active schools as a setting and community networks. So far, CEREPS looked at 4 different dimensions for physical activity settings in schools. Of course, we have physical education in the core, together also with school sport, which is implemented also during the school day, but not part of curricular classes. But then we have other moments during the school day where physical activity and thus also physical education in some way takes place. We can have active learning during school lessons, which becomes also more and more popular because there's proven evidence that active learning can have a very positive effect on the learning processes. Then we have physical activity in recess, in between lessons, where kids can be physically active as well. And of course, there are different kind of after-school programs or events or even days where physical activity or sports play a major role. So this has been identified and discussed by CEREPS in the past. But if we look at this physical education delivery at an active school, we could even look at it in a more detailed way based on a model of an active school that I have developed with my colleague, Dr. Richard Bailey, for a book chapter this year. Again, the core, and I think we can agree on this, that the core always will be physical education as a subject. But during classes, we have other moments where physical activity can play a role. We have active classroom learning, as already mentioned, but then also we have active breaks. We have relaxation phases during learning times. We have cross-curricular classes where physical activity can play a major role. And we have active dynamic sitting in a classroom where students do not always sit quiet on their seat. Then, going out of the classes, but still remaining in the school day, we have school sports, of course, competitive or non-competitive. We have active recess during break times. We have physical activity-related school events, and there are preschool and after-school clubs and activities, as already mentioned on the slide before. But the life of children and adolescents does not stop here. They also have to come to the school in a specific way, and there might be active transport to school, like walking or cycling. There is the idea of active homework that can play a role, where, for example, active breaks can also be included in the homework at home. And finally, we have leisure time. And what you all want to have is that children and adolescents are active during their leisure time. And when it comes to the school, in order that such a model of an active school can be implemented and can happen, school organization and school development plays a very important role. So there are very important factors that can have a positive or a negative influence here, like the building, the school building itself, the design of the playground and the classrooms, especially during these times where it's a recommendation that children during school day spend a lot of time outside of the classroom, outdoor. It's very important to have playgrounds that invite them to be active. Then we have the sport and activity facilities, and again, the community-based partners. And this then leads us to what we can call an active school community network. And this is a figure that resembles, it's quite the same like we had in the beginning, where we have in the center, in the micro level, physical education, where we have teachers and students interchanging. Then on the next level, we have the school cooperating with partners like clubs on the community level, and also the home and the parents. And then we have on the macro level, the system, the educational system, which also then is not standing alone. The environment plays a role. We have stakeholders, associations that play a role, and we have the economy. So this said, I will come now to the conclusions, and I will raise, based on the reflections done so far, some questions how to address the topic of quality of physical education. Here you see a summary of all the figures that we have seen before. And yeah, where are we now? I want to raise the question, is physical education maybe more than a school subject? Because I mentioned before, physical education in the definition of the term does not only take place during a school subject, which in very much countries has also only limited time. So here we have maybe to enlarge the definition of physical education. And we have to look not only at formal education, so formal physical education defined by a curriculum in an educational system, where during assigned lessons and curricular time, teachers try to work on achieving the product that we want to have and make our students physically well-educated students. We have also other settings for education, for physical education. We have, for example, non-formal physical education, like in childcare institutions or outside of the curricular time during the school day. And we also have informal physical education, which might happen during recess time during the school day, which might happen during leisure time, which might happen at home. So what we suggest, when we take it serious to reach an outcome like a physical well-educated child or a physically literate child, we should really look over the border of the subject of physical education. Finally, concluding here now, we could maybe agree that physical education is in the end more than a school subject, and that besides formal physical education, we have also non-formal and informal physical education. But, and this is very important, we should not forget this, formal physical education as a school subject always represents the core of this holistic overarching perspective. It is in the center, like it is for many things also in other areas that we address during school time, like, for example, mathematics, or like, for example, language education. The core, except maybe for mother language, is always in school, and the application is outside, and there are also other settings where you can learn languages. From a macro perspective that we are taking here, physical education thus involves many stakeholders, including school external stakeholders. So the subject, physical education, should not only stay in a closed room, but should open the doors and look out for other partners that contribute as well to this larger perspective of physical education. And finally, if we agree on these kind of conclusions, maybe we have to ask the questions. So if so far physical education is the term that we use for the school subject, maybe we have to find a different term when we talk about this holistic, overarching perspective on physical education. So these are the references that we have used for our presentation, and I want to thank you for your attention. I also raise attention to our website, cereps.eu, which basically is already live, but is still under construction, and I'm happy to answer questions if there are. Thank you very much.
Készült Magyarország kormánya megbízásából az Európai Unió támogatásával.